Sup, freaks? This episode was brought to you by our good friends at CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is here to help you reimagine how you pay your healthcare costs, how you take care of your healthcare. CrowdHealth is not health insurance. It's actually trying to get more and more people to walk away from the health insurance industry because it's an opaque black box where you throw money in. You don't really know what's going on with it. You don't know how your healthcare costs are being negotiated on your behalf by the health insurance companies. You really don't know if you're being taken care of or not. CrowdHealth is here to fix that. What you do when you join CrowdHealth is you join a community of people who are taking care of themselves and who really want to become sovereign with their healthcare. What you do is you become a member and you pay a monthly fee. That fee goes to a dedicated health account, a bank account that you control, that you have visibility into, that you can always take with you at the end of the day if you decide to move away from CrowdHealth. You pay that monthly subscription fee. And then if you ever have a health event, you bring your healthcare bill to the CrowdHealth team. They go to the doctor, negotiate your health expense down to a lower price because they actually work on your behalf as opposed to the insurance companies. And then you pay the first $500 of your healthcare cost, and then it goes out to the CrowdHealth community, and your bill is crowdsourced. To date, they've had 100% of their healthcare bills paid, and it's a beautiful thing. They're also adding a Bitcoin component where a portion of your monthly subscription fee will get put into Bitcoin, so you have your fiat dollars alongside your Bitcoin account. Again, you have access to both at the end of the day if you ever want to walk away from it. But again, it helps you lower your healthcare costs because they're there to negotiate on your behalf. It's a much more personal experience instead of calling a 1-800 number. When you become a CrowdHealth member, you have a dedicated health advocate who is the same person throughout your time with CrowdHealth, who's going to walk you through everything you need to do and make sure that you're getting the best care that you can get that you can possibly get. Go to joincrowdhealth.com/TFTC. The first 1,000 members of the Bitcoin community are going to get, using the code TFTC, are going to get $99 a month for the first 6 months of their healthcare, of their CrowdHealth cost. So go check this out. Me and my family, we use CrowdHealth. We've decided to opt out of the traditional health insurance industry. Again, it's very opaque. Feel like it doesn't really take care of us. So come join us in the CrowdHealth community. Use the code TFTC.
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
Cigars lit. We can go live.
Cigars lit.
We're not going live, but we're recording this.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I will warn, I am on Starlink, and it is a little overcast, so if I flake out, you may have to do an edit or two here or there, just so you know.
That's fine.
Okay, just want to let you know.
Is SpaceX subsidizing your Starlink like they are in Ukraine?
No, they're not. Absolutely not. I'm not Ukrainian. That's the problem. So, if I was, and if I was a neo-Nazi and I was Ukrainian, then I would be getting free Starlink.
The backlash for him asking for the government to pay him.
I thought that was brilliant on his part, actually. It really was really very strong. Like, I think he's playing a very interesting game, Musk is. So,
well, they're going to come after him now. It seems like they're positioning to tie him to Putin.
Oh yeah.
Because
I mean, anybody who doesn't give full-throated support to Ukraine Nazis and World War III is obviously a Putin puppet. Like, duh. It's just like everybody to the right of Karl Marx is a fascist who wants to put us all in camps.
Yeah, it's the weird thing about this year. I mean, it's been many years in the making, but the binary options that individuals are given on all these issues.
And they're false binaries.
Oh, yes, exactly. I mean, I wrote a newsletter about it last Friday because people need to understand that they're being put into this narrative framework from which they're given two options. They're either pro-America, anti-Putin, or pro-Putin, anti-freedom, which is...
Yeah, well, it's always been that way. And it's the Straussian thing. Like, give them two choices, one of which is wholly unacceptable, the other one which is, no one even would have considered under normal circumstances in order to synthesize and get what they actually. That's the Straussian what I call the Straussian two-step, it's really a Hegel over and over and over again. It's just nothing new.
Yeah, the Hegelian dialect.
The Hegelian dialectic, what Leo Strauss, taught an entire generation how to do. So I like to call it the Straussian two-step, just to, give it a
little flair.
Just give it a twist. Just give it a twist to get everybody to think about it. You know what I mean?
Well,
it's not fun if you don't put you don't make it. If you don't make it sarcastic, it doesn't stick. It's like comedy is the best way to expose these people. So
yes, we need to ridicule these people more in a very cogent, comedic way, because you can only laugh at what's going on. I mean, you can do more than that, but it's like we can cry about it, but that ain't gonna do us any good either, right? So no. So outside of like the Straussian model, the false binaries that are given to people, like what are the other options in your mind? The other
options is to always ask yourself, why are they pushing those two options on you, right? Why are they trying to restrict nuance? Why are they trying to put you in one camp versus the other and taking all the other options away? Whenever somebody's giving you whenever somebody's giving you an ultimatum, it's because they're in a weak position. Okay. So by saying you're either with us or against us, or you're pro-Putin, you're anti-Putin, or you're this or you're that, by doing that, what they're doing is they're giving you an ultimatum. You have two choices. You can either submit to what I say, or you can oppose me. And by defining everything that's not their position as wrong, then, it takes away all possibility for, negotiation, resolution and everything else. And diplomacy is the art of negotiation, right? Diplomacy is the art of saying, all right, well, I hear what you want, you hear what I want, and let's work out an agreement that no one's happy with. That's what diplomats are supposed to do. Do we see anybody doing that?
No, it's been ripped off the table, and then Elon is getting destroyed for tweeting, like, hey, here's probably what should happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly right. That is the mechanism of a bully, and the mechanism of a tyrant, and the mechanism of somebody who has an agenda that is not going to be tolerated. That opposition to which is not going to be tolerated. Period. So they have their goal. So now it's just a question of whether or not they can, beat it into our heads long enough and hard enough that we're going to go along with their goal. I got news for you. Fuck you. No, just not doing it. Like, I'm just going to keep saying no. And I'm going to keep saying, no, there are other options. And we have to keep saying, no, there are other options. And when given the opportunity to, just call nonsense on it, just call bullshit on it. Go, no, you're just being a bully. And only bullies act this way. Only people with very weak positions act this way. Because bullies are ultimately weak. They can't win through persuasion. They can only win with, the bludgeon.
Brute force.
And in this case, it's a rhetorical bludgeon, and it's 40% bots on Twitter.
That's been one of my favorite trends in recent months. Is your quote tweet bot response, calling them out.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, there they are, just bot.
Well,
oh look, the bots think they have friends now. Oh look, the bots think they're alive now. You just make fun of it. Like, again, as always, agree and amplify. Make fun of it, and don't feed the trolls. Because the minute you call them a bot, even if they're not a bot, God forbid if you get it wrong 1 out of 10 times, who cares? Like, it's not like it's a person you want to talk to anyway. It's not like it's a person you want to have a conversation with. Like, they might as well be a bot. They're like, oh, I'm not a bot. Okay, you're not a bot, but you're acting like one.
Yeah.
In public, no less. How little self-respect do you have?
Never apologize to the bots. So there's bots, and then there's NPCs that are indistinguishable from bots.
Exactly.
And so going back to, I know you, and I hope you know that I am going to keep saying, fuck you. Like, you're not pushing us down this path. It doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't make any sense to me. Do you think there's any penetration of this fuck you mentality eking into the broader populace as we send billions and billions of dollars over there with no accountability on the back end? Do you think people are beginning to wake up to this insanity? Do you think, similar to what happened post 9/11, leading up to the Iraq War, the propaganda machine, the war machine, is being successful in ginning up hatred.
I don't think it's been successful at all. I think it's been insanely unsuccessful. All the polling coming into the midterms is they're the only thing less on Americans' minds than the war in Ukraine is the January 6th trials. And the thing that's only slightly more on their minds than the Ukraine war is abortion. And these are the Democrats, three things they're running on. Like, they're losing. They've lost the PR war. They sent Zelensky on tour, for Christ's sake, for 7 months. I said this in my Ron Paul talk, the Ron Paul talk in June. I said they put him on tour like he's fucking Shakira, for Christ's sake, and it didn't work. Waving his ass in public and doing the whole thing, and like Tucker Carlson's out there going, "Who is this guy in a friggin' t-shirt and a green screen to shake us down for money?"
Right. Well, he's got Bono visiting him. Ben Stiller's visiting him. All the celebrities are going over there.
Celebrities are paid to do what they're supposed to do. It's all of it's a Big Bill Hicks routine. And you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. It's
all a ride, folks. It's all suck Satan's cock. Like it's all bend the knee and suck Satan's cock. That's what this is about. It's funny. Like as my profile rises, I find myself every once in a while just wanting to make sure everybody that I'm salty, and that because I don't want to. It's like I almost don't want to get too big too quickly. Like I want to make sure that there's enough backlog of moments where I'm like, yeah, I'm completely not Fox News material. I don't want to. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to be too big. I don't want to. I just want to be because that way I'm so free. I don't have to worry about them taking me out because too many people. Again, it's just enough people that I just got an email from a woman that said, "You're brilliant, you're outstanding, but you curse too much." I'm like, sorry
for
I
fucking
can't support
cursing.
you. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I've gotten that
okay.
before.
It is what it is. Like
stop cursing
I don't know how
emails.
often you get it, but I get it all the time.
Because I used to curse a lot. I don't as much anymore, but in the newsletter I used to curse a lot on people.
I do emails here and there. I mean, it depends on the podcast. It depends on the media appearance. It depends on the host and what they want. And I'm more than willing to be, low energy and, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Fit for human consumption, as it were. And then there are other times when I'm like, you know what? No. And it's a thing you do. It's a persona you play every once in a while just to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. And, I know that the persona should be consistent, but at the same time, I think it's maybe better, sometimes to just let things fly.
Yeah.
Know when you can be, because everybody is this salty when the cameras aren't talking, when the cameras aren't, right? Everybody is this salty. We all act like, especially high performance men, especially, high alpha men, and high, with high degrees of competence, we all just, let the invective fly on a regular basis. We all say things that we're not supposed to say in public, but something, like it is what it is. Like we all know it. So why are you trying to censor yourself? Can you imagine what happens when the cameras are turned off, anywhere? Like it's just silly. I
was gonna say it's freeing. Let the tea flow. And I think we're actually reaching a point where like the talking heads on CNBC or Bloomberg or the people who try to put on this perfect persona, it's becoming so obviously inauthentic that it's like you can tell like because of independent media and people like yourself getting your voice and your perspective out there and people really resonating with it. Like, hey, this is how I think. They go and they'll see somebody talking proper on CNBC and it's just so blatantly robotic and scripted. People have at least I do have like a natural aversion to it.
Sure. And it's funny. I just did a 5 or 7 minute segment for RT International about an hour ago. So I've been on RT, I think now like 3 or 4 times in the last couple weeks, which is very nice. And they're always very polite. Oh, by the way, the Russian media is always very, very polite and, almost unfailingly polite. And meanwhile, I never get a phone call from the American media, of course. And I always put on the best. I always put on my best my best friend, and do so knowing full well that I've got the non-salty verbal patter, and I've got the salty verbal patter, right? And you have to practice both, for every moment. So whenever and you have to be able to shift with the time. So, and the best thing, of course, is to match the energy of the person you're working with. So today I'm working with you. You're laid back and thing, and we're going to do the thing, and I'm going to lean back in my chair, smoke a cigar, have a cup of coffee, and we'll have a nice informal chat.
Well,
So,
I'm happy that you feel this way on this show, because
Sure.
it does bring out the best of the guests. It's just comfortable. We're here to have a chat. No censorship. Don't self-censor, because the world is crazy right now, and people need good information, which is what I think you've been providing, and why I wanted you back on today, or not today specifically, but now, considering our first conversation was in like April or May of
Right.
this year, and you put forth your thesis that what we're witnessing is, at least in financial markets, is the Fed versus Davos class, and everything that has played out since then with the rate hikes, with inflation, with the posturing from the Fed, particularly right now, seems to be pointing in that direction. So very interested to get an update on your thoughts on what's going on behind the scenes, because it's getting chaotic. It seems like the Fed is dead set on just completely breaking credit markets at some point in the next quarter or two.
I think they have to, Marty. This is the thing. This is what I was trying to say earlier in the year. And even when you and I first spoke back in April and May, I don't remember if it was April or May, but I remember, and let's look at the beginning of this year. I was as hawkish, and you and I hadn't spoken then. We weren't in each other's orbit then, but with my patrons and informally, I was saying to people, yeah, I can see the Fed doing the 25 basis point rate hikes this year. Go to 1.75% by the end of the year. Everybody, many of the people I talked to said, they'll do 2 or 3, or they'll even get to 1%, and then they'll have to give 1 back, and they'll do this, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I thought I was being hawkish at 1.75 to 2% by the end of the year. Privately or internally, I was like, Powell, you need to go to 4%. You need to really take these people down. If you're the guy I think you are, you need to go to 4% by the end of the year. But politically, I don't know if you can get away with that, or will you break? I didn't understand the plumbing of the capital markets even as well then as I do now, and I don't for any large values of competence. So I believe that I'm competent in understanding the plumbing of the capital markets. I've never wanted to be that guy, right? I never wanted to be a guy who understood these things this way. I've had to learn it, slowly but surely. At times I've even larped as a guy who thinks he knows something about the plumbing of the financial markets. And well, then, behind the scenes going, okay, clearly this is what's happening, and you need to understand this stuff better, so you need to get into it more. And thankfully, I have the greatest patrons in the world, because they're all inspired by what I've talked about and gotten them, their brains firing, and their brain cells are, popping off left and right, and they're saying stuff, and they're bringing ideas to me, and then we're riffing off of each other back and forth in our private, chat server and our private community. And, lo and behold, I'm having to, up my game in real time, and then look for better indicators or create better indicators to see if I'm right about this stuff, and take my own intuition and my ability to, understand and map everybody's incentives, and then see how it plays and see how that all, distills itself down into actual movements, actual actions that you see in the real world, statements made by certain people, actions taken by other people in response to actions taken by somebody else. So, every time Jerome Powell makes a hawkish statement, Janet Yellen's always there a week later trying to undermine him, right? Well, doesn't matter what the actual effect of these things is, right? What matters is that every time Powell tries to do X, Yellen tries to do not X.
Which is very interesting, considering Janet's a former chairwoman of the Fed. She handed it over to Jay Powell, and you don't really see that much interfighting between Fed governors or some, at least chairman,
and the Treasury Department.
Yeah,
right, and the Treasury Secretary. It is very weird. And as opposed to just going back and defaulting on, well, they've always, gotten along in the past and they've always done blah, blah. Like, no, something's different. You have to be willing to just say something is different. And the problem is, and this is what I've been trying to illuminate or elucidate for people, is that maybe the factions you thought existed weren't the factions that are the factions that actually exist. Maybe there's something else going on here. Like, as a libertarian, in philosophically and as an Austrian economist, by personal training. Again, no degree in economics or anything. You can't point to my resume and say, see, I've got this great resume and blah, blah, and because of that, I can use the appeal from authority perspective. I can't do that. What I can say is this, but what we learn in both by mapping things both as a libertarian politically and as an Austrian economist economically are the following, which is that incentives matter. People always want to act in their best interest, even if roadblocks are put up in front of them to keep them from doing what they want to do in the most efficient manner, right? So regulatory capture, Davos is really good at putting up a roadblock from you doing the thing you want to do, right? Doesn't matter what it is. And then you have to then create a workaround. And that workaround is then, creates an inefficiency, which raises the cost of doing the thing, which effectively is a barrier to entry and keeps certain small players out of the market and advantages their guys at the expense of the little man, of anybody challenging their regime. And so you see Yellen and Gensler and other members of the American government, or you see, the same thing happening in Britain, or you see the same thing happen in Germany, or see it at the EU level or whatever. And it's always the same thing over and over and over again. So everybody who engages in that particular behavior is clearly working for Davos. And just run that as your heuristic, and then just say, okay, does that track? And if it tracks, if the gloves don't fit, you got to acquit, right? I mean, if it keeps tracking, then you just keep doing that until something changes. And whenever you see somebody not doing that, then you got to assume that they're fighting them. Yeah. And you don't always get every one of those right. You're not always right. This is one of the things I used to, I remember telling Mike Shedlock a long time ago, I'm like, Mike, it's really simple. My argument is that these people are trying to fuck us all the time. I'm going to be right 75% of the time, just assuming that whatever they want to do is bad.
It's a good assumption.
Right? I mean, it's just to start there. And then if you're wrong 25% of the time, you're still batting about 40% better than everybody else who's only right about 35% of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, so go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say on this particular tip, like Fed versus Davos, it seems like you're right. You mentioned Yellen and the Treasury. That's just one entity trying to undermine them. But then, I mean, in recent weeks, you've had the UN and the IMF come out as well, and essentially begging the Fed, hey, reverse your rate hikes. And obviously, we've seen interventions by the Bank of Japan, Bank of England, and many other.
Now, all those interventions are slightly different.
Yes.
The Bank of Japan is acting as the Fed's wingman, by the way, whereas the Bank of England just took down the new government in order to betray Brexit and put the UK back in the fold with the rest of Europe. And this has all happened since Liz died and Charles has taken over.
Is he involved in this in some way?
Oh, fuck yeah. Charles just over the weekend with the resignation of Kwarteng as Chancellor of the Exchequer and Liz Truss having to put in Jeremy Hunt, who's as big a Remainer and as big a an Oxford blue blood, UK freaking oligarch simp as you could possibly imagine, as his replacement. Clearly, they're moving. And then you go look at the polls in Britain, and Conservatives are now polling at 25%. Labour's polling at 52%.
How could the people?
Latest polls I saw this morning on Europe Elects is on Twitter is now going back into the EU is now a 59-41.
How could people look at the EU and be like, I want to go back to that, especially with?
Because they betrayed Brexit at every turn, and they've made the life in the UK worse since Brexit than it was before Brexit. And now the middle of Britain has shifted, at least according to the polls. And you salt the polls to taste. I'm not, remember the polls on the eve of Brexit were that Brexit was going to lose 55-45, and it wound up winning 52-48. So, there's lies, damn lies, statistics, and British polling in that order. So, it is what it is. But I don't know. What I'm saying is they've clearly shifted popular opinion in this direction. It's been nothing but, as the English would say, a dog's breakfast since Boris Johnson took them out of the EU with Brexit. We always knew that the EU would never stop to try and get them back. The British aristocracy was all Remain. The crown, other than Liz, was Remain. Liz was not Remain. Liz was the only one trying to preserve or get back British sovereignty. It's why she and Trump got along. And it's why they were desperate to keep Trump from meeting with the Queen.
I didn't realize that.
Remember when Trump went to meet with the Queen?
She missed her meeting? Yeah, what happened?
No. They worked for weeks to try and block Trump from even going into Britain. They didn't even want to give the President of the United States a fucking visa into the United Kingdom to meet with the Queen. Okay? Because, Donald Trump isn't a real U.S. president. He's not an acceptable U.S. president. This was their argument.
Yeah, he's not well put together enough to meet the Queen. He's not dainty enough. But
he'll embarrass the United States. How can he do this? Blah blah. It was just awful. No, what it was is they didn't want Trump and the Queen to work out a way to, fuck the EU and screw everybody else over. Now, what a shock! 6 months later, we get COVID.
But even with that, let's say the Davos class has made gains in terms of brute forcing their agenda. But again, a lot of people, myself included, make the argument they're doing too much, too fast. Then you have these two parallel things running right now, which is this social aspect, which is the Davos class trying to implement their communistic system on the world. But then you have this elephant in the room, which is the global financial system, which seems to be in a very precarious situation. Are the two intermingled? Is it the Great Reset, destroy the financial system so that we can usher this in? Or is it an untimely coincidence for the Davos class where they're going to have to juggle this social ushering with a financial calamity, and people are going to be like, hey, you sort of created this. Why would we go along with you on these social aspects?
Well, I think the problem is that it's confusing because in order for the Fed to beat Davos, they have to engender a financial crisis that will look like the one that people think Davos was trying to institute on their own. So it's going to look that way. Same thing with them arguing that Putin gave them the war they wanted by invading Ukraine. So therefore, Putin must be a WEF shill because he gave them the war that they clearly wanted, right? He gave them the war they wanted so that they can have a war that they can use to cover the insolvency and the collapse of the Western financial system. But they never wanted it to happen in these terms. See, they always wanted it to happen on their time, in their way, with their parameters, ring-fenced the way they wanted it. And the way they wanted it was that Europe would collapse last, not first. The Fed raising interest rates the way they are leaves the European Union and old European money center banks really vulnerable. Whereas American banks, and you can argue with me all you want about how American banks are vulnerable. Yeah, they are vulnerable. But so what? They have the Fed who can make infinite amounts of elastic money. The ECB doesn't have that opportunity, doesn't have that ability. It's not the same institution at all. And I think people need to wrap their heads around this. It ain't just one big club. If you're sitting there and you're JP Morgan, I keep saying this, you're Jamie Dimon, you're the head of JP Morgan Chase, you're one of the main shareholders of the New York Fed, and these Euro trash freaking German commies and old colonialists who your dad fought, you know, who JP Morgan himself fought 120 years ago to have an independent banking system from the UK. You think that it doesn't make any sense. We've been fighting a way out from underneath the British crown and from the old European colonial powers since the day Cornwallis surrendered to Yorktown, for Christ's sake. These people. I mean, Hamilton was working for the crown, for fuck's sake. He's on the $10 bill.
Still beholden to a degree. And so
So let me just finish. Let me just kind of finish that point real quick, which is that, and then I'll happily turn the mic back over. So when you really start thinking about it this way, the Fed has the ability to engender a crash in a sovereign bond crisis. But remember what we saw in Britain just the other day with the pension funds blowing up because of the run on UK gilts, right? There was a run on UK sovereign debt at a time when the pension funds were weak because they're already down 30% in the equity markets. They're already down 30% on their bond holdings, right? They're already down 10, 50, 25% on the pound itself. Pound's down from $1.42 down to $1.10 before, or $1.14 before the run on the pound that 2 weeks ago that brought it to $1.04, right? Think about that. So all those British pension systems were now looking at massive margin calls, massive collateral calls. They either have to get rid of these investments, which they're upside down on, or they've got to somehow, call up collateral from the companies that, they manage here, right? That manage, whose pensions they manage. Well, who was not willing to post collateral for these, these leveraged debt instrument investments? The one who issued them, BlackRock. Who's BlackRock working for? Davos. The BOE comes in and gives them a lifeline for a couple of weeks, scaring the markets, and then all of a sudden says, nope, you've got until Friday.
Yeah, 3 days.
That was a coup attempt. The BOE executed a coup attempt against the Truss government, used the cover of the announcement of Truss's budget and tax scheme as the means by which to run an operation, an economic hitman style operation on the British pound and the UK gilt market. And guess who that was a warning to? The Italians. Because when Meloni's government comes in, and she's going to go and try and do the same thing, try and put a fiscal plan together to save Italy, what do you think they're going to do to her? They're going to run the same operation. They're going to try and split the coalition right when it gets formed, and then turn around and say, "Oh no, she's not accepted. See, she doesn't know what she's doing." Then you get backstabbing within the coalition. Forza Italia maybe turns on her, but yada. And then what will happen? Mattarella and the Roman mafia, political mafia, will turn around and go, "Look, we're going to give you another technocratic government, a la Mario Draghi, Mario Monti, Renzi, and everything else, so that Italy does not have an elected government, because they haven't really had one since 2011, and nothing will change. And they'll threaten them through the bond markets. Now, Meloni, if she's smart, will just slow her roll. We'll see. But this is all playing out exactly. But that maps with all the factions that I've laid out. Truss wanted energy security for Britain. Open up the exploration for oil and gas. Do away with the fracking ban, right? Turn Britain into an energy exporting powerhouse over the course of the next 10 years. Lower taxes and lower regulations to unfuck the British economy, which is stuck in first gear because of all these latent ties to the EU that still haven't been worked out post-Brexit, right? So that was the plan. She had a perfectly good plan. And at the same time, she's dealing with massively high energy prices. So, of course, okay, we're going to have to spend some money that we don't have by subsidizing people's electricity bills for maybe a year or two. It's going to be bad for the budget, but we can get through this with the United Kingdom, for Christ's sake. It's not like they're freaking Venezuela.
Yeah, it was really interesting how quickly they tried to, like, she put in those tax breaks, and then the week later, the pound crashes, the gilt market crashes. And they tried to correlate it to that directly. Only a week
and they
after.
did. They tried to sell. So they just timed it to the announcement and then ran the operation. And I don't know what operation they ran, but somebody obviously ran the stops on the UK gilt market somewhere. And it wasn't hard to do at that point. That's the way it's. And then they just write bogus headlines for the algorithms to react to, which they did.
How effective can this be? Like, because it seems like if they want to mess up Truss, they want to mess up Maloney. Is there a timing aspect here? Like, how long do they have, particularly in the sovereign debt markets? Because it's getting pretty precarious. Even here in the United States, rates are getting astronomical. The amount of interest payments alone is going up significantly.
Well,
A lot of the treasuries are due to mature in the next 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like it seems like a pretty massive, the way you describe it, a pretty massive game of chicken with high stakes at every turn, and something could go wrong somewhere.
I think it is a big game of chicken, and the big question then is Daniel DiMartino Booth. I don't know if you watched the interview she gave over at Hedgeye the other day with Keith McCullough. I watched it, and it was literally like she was telling me, "You're right, but you missed this, this, and this." So, young Padawan, go learn about these things: leveraged loan debt. The Federal Reserve is not fighting inflation by raising interest rates because the Fed mostly owns TIPS, not treasuries. Most of their treasury portfolio is in TIPS. And guess what happens when inflation goes up? What do TIPS do? TIPS go up in value.
Yeah.
Right?
They don't have the inverse correlation.
Right. The inverse correlation. If inflation goes up, then the value of the TIPS bond goes up in order to offset the loss, the purchasing power loss through the CPI, the yield loss through the rise in the CPI. So I didn't know that. I don't ask me why I didn't know that. Probably because I'm just too freaking lazy to go look it up. Fair enough. But Booth made that point the other day, and I was like, oh, well, so the Fed, instead she used the words, the Fed is not fighting inflation by raising rate hikes, which is exactly what I've been saying for a long time. Keith McCullough followed up by saying, well, then what are they doing? She's like, I can't say.
Trying to break credit markets?
I can't tell you that. No, it's clearly what she was trying to say was they're trying to destroy the Eurodollar markets. They're breaking the offshore credit markets, not the domestic credit markets, the offshore credit markets. They're trying to break the Hong Kong peg if you're a neocon. They're trying to break Europe if you're a libertarian. Okay, so Europe is the more perfect communist union.
So in this case, and this is hard for me to grok as somebody who's been writing about it and thinking about it and was radicalized when I was 17 in the wake of 2008. The Fed is the good guy for freedom in this case?
They're the good guy in the fact that because their incentives are existential to fight Davos, that they're the better choice now. But they're still acting in their own best interest. They're not acting in our interest. They may be. It's very possible that they're looking at this going, well, we can't continue to run our grift if they don't have access, if the people don't have access to our banks. So they, Klaus von Kami-Schnitzel, he wants to do away with all that and just, give it to the Fed. But the Fed doesn't really run a grift in that respect, because the Fed is ultimately a government institution. Ultimately, because the Fed's not allowed to post a profit that gets distributed to shareholders. It all goes back to the Treasury. The benefit to the New York banks who are the shareholders are that they have access to the Fed discount window. They have access to, maybe there's some kickbacks to them, but ultimately, in reality, the lion's share of what the Fed earns goes to the Treasury Department.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's indirectly does Wall Street benefit from all this? Of course, I'm not saying Wall Street doesn't benefit, but not in the, the Fed makes $100 billion on on their portfolio every year, and then that gets distributed directly to the shareholders. No, that goes back to the Treasury Department, right? So if you do away with the commercial banks who own the Fed, and they don't have any secondary bennies from being shareholders in the Fed by being able to use Fed policy to, feather their nest, then where's their incentive structure to still be shareholders of the Federal Reserve?
Yeah, it doesn't exist. So what you're describing, the alternative that Davos wants, right, is the CBDC that cuts out these banks.
Right. You don't want you don't have the two-tier transmission system where you've got the central banks and the commercial banks, and then the commercial banks and us, and the overlap between the two rings of the financial system, or the two transmission belts of the financial system. It's two different gears. You've got a gear over here between the Fed and the commercial banks, and then you got a gear over here between the commercial banks and us. They want to collapse that into one gear, and they don't need the commercial banks anymore. So why should they even own shares in the Federal Reserve? So why would Jamie Dimon give this up?
Oh, he's not.
Why would John Solomon give this up? He wouldn't.
No. Jamie's been a bit fiery too. I mean, you've seen him come out in Congress and call out idiotic energy policy, say drill baby drill. Yeah. Really, I mean, he's himself has been posturing like anti, like let's not repeat.
He's been posturing anti-Davos for 3 years now. It was his bank that refused to start. It was first J.P. Morgan in 2019.
They started that
refuse
liquidity
to
crisis.
Take Eurozone debt as collateral for repos.
Yeah,
he was the first one to deny them dollars.
Yeah, because they rotated out of treasuries over the course of that year. And then when you had that overnight repo spasm, it was because they weren't providing cash to that market anymore.
Mm-hmm. They weren't providing the cash to the market, so the Fed had to.
Yeah.
But if I look at this and I say, and I said back then, well, that'll give us about 6 months, a la 2007, 2008, because the repo market blew up in September of 2007, and then Bear Stearns was vaporized in 2008. So the Fed stepped in and created about 6 months worth of a halo effect, but didn't fix anything. And then there was going to be another crisis, and lo and behold, in March of 2008, as far as I'm concerned, that was going to happen anyway. They just launched COVID to take everybody out.
Yeah.
COVID's a big financial psyop, guys. Not saying that the virus wasn't real and that a lot of people didn't die or any of those. It was that too. But I personally, at this point, am firmly convinced that the true purpose of COVID was to drive a wedge between Trump and Powell, get the CARES Act passed, and force the Fed to monetize a whole lot of debt that they didn't want to monetize. Powell was not consulted about any of this. He fought against the CARES Act and all of that shit, tooth and nail. You go back to that time period. He was not happy about this. He had to go along with it anyway because he didn't have any options. Because Congress spent the money. The CARES Act gave Blackrock access to the Fed funds window to go start buying up residential real estate all over the United States and crowding out
corporate bonds too, right?
Corporate bonds too, and they got access to the plunge protection team, the equity portfolio for the plunge protection team.
Yeah, I mean, the convenience of COVID and the ability to turn on the money printers in late March, early April 2020, and that also basically creating amnesia for what happened in September 2019 is very too perfect.
And think about this. That all happens, and they can get rid of Trump. And what happened? That was a Davos wet dream. And guess who didn't print money? Guess who didn't agree to print money until the middle of 2021? The European Union. The Fed.
They were able to hold off that long.
The Fed printed $7 trillion, $6 trillion. The Europe didn't. I remember having Peter Bookbar on my podcast, and I was talking about that. I was trying to bring these ideas up to him, and he just dismissed every goddamn one of them. He said, "Yeah, but we printed $7 trillion, and the ECB printed $600 billion. So whose balance sheet is in better shape than ours? Than ours? Theirs is." So he was like, "There's no way the euro is going to collapse. There's no way this is going to happen." The Fed does. He literally said to me, "Go back and listen." I don't think that Jay Powell gets up in the morning gives one damn about Europe at all. I'm like, I think you're wrong. It was not a fun conversation, by the way. It was one of the few times when I really had to hold my tongue against the guest. And by the way, I've turned out to be right. No offense to Peter, but you were wrong.
Well, now I'm just playing this out in my head. So Powell, just to try to understand your thesis and your perspective, Powell essentially had to wait for COVID lockdowns and the scare around COVID to basically go away. And then obviously we printed trillions of dollars and the justification for rate hikes was there. And then he used that as an opportunity to turn it up to 11.
What he did was he waited until the June of 2021 when the European Union was now ready to start printing money and to make the big pitch for we're going to set global monetary policy and coordinate it for climate change. And he stood up and said no 2 weeks before he raised the reverse repo rate 5 basis points above the Fed funds rate and ended the bull market in the euro. Those two things are correlated in time right around June 16th.
Almost perfectly.
The Fed meeting happened the same day that Biden was in Geneva meeting with Putin to stave off World War III then. The euro collapsed 3 cents that Thursday and Friday. The Fed made their announcement on Wednesday. Zero Hedge ran an article, ran a big nothing burger of a Fed meeting, except they raised this one little technical rate, 5 basis points. And I went, huh. And then the euro collapsed 3%. And then the reverse repo facility started blowing out. And then every day it was another headline. Reverse repo rolling balance is $700 billion, $900 billion. It hit $1 trillion. Oh my God. Now it's $1.5 trillion. Blah, blah, blah. Now it's $2.3 trillion.
Yeah, I was going to say it's above 2 now.
And if you don't think that liquidity, that isn't money that the Fed can dump into the market at a moment's notice.
Yeah. And 15
if
months
the banks
later,
need dollars, they can give treasuries back to the, see, the reason they needed to do that was that during COVID, the savings rate in the United States hit 30%. Normally it hovers between 5 and 7. If it ever gets above 7%, the Fed likes to engage in QE, by the way. Go look at it. Okay.
I'm trying to understand that because
even with the restatement of U.S. personal savings rates over the years, because they've restated all the data. It used to be above 5%. Now it's above 7.5%. But I have a 12-year chart now, 14-year chart of when QE starts and stops versus the savings rate in the United States.
So QE starts around above 7% savings rate. And again, the rationalization signal the markets. Signal the market. Yeah.
Right. Too much savings is bad, so we need to get that money flowing.
Mm-hmm.
People are saving too much, so let's get that money flowing. Okay, and QE is the way to do that, by putting money into the system, even if it's only sterilized money.
And you entice people to get money off the sidelines because they'll put it in equities or whatever because they know the Fed's printing and it'll drive up those values.
So with the reverse, what's a reverse repo? A reverse repo is simple. When the savings rate is high, the banks don't have enough collateral for all the savings. They got to hold treasuries on their balance sheet as reserves to cover the savings, or they've got to lend that money out, right? And then they can keep the loans on their books as the reserves, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if they don't want to lend because the lending environment sucks? What do they got to do? They got to get treasury somewhere. Who better to get them from? The Fed, who's got this big pile of treasuries they've been sitting on from all the years of QE. The reverse repo is the bank buys a treasury and gives dollars back to the Fed.
Mm-hmm.
So the Fed's sitting on $2.5 trillion worth of money. The banks are sitting on $2.5 trillion worth of treasuries to keep the treasury markets liquid. As the savings rate fell, now the need for reserves technically isn't as high. but that money's still not coming out of the reverse repo facility. Why? They're getting paid 5 basis points over the Fed funds rate, which is still better than lending it out into the market.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does this play out? What are they like? What in your mind?
I haven't even explained half of this fucking story yet. This is the worst part about this.
Well,
This is the problem: is that this is that complicated, right, Marty? I don't mean to. Again, this is not about my ego or any of this shit. This is just about what I've had to do in order to try and like make this thing fit all the pieces together.
Well, I'm sitting here and I'm just
once you understand, how does it play out? It plays out that the Fed has much more room to raise rates than anybody ever thought.
I saw you tweet and you think they're going to go to 7% at least.
6%.
Yeah.
I don't know about 7. I mean, everyone, like, I don't ever take me seriously, like, about that stuff, because I just send numbers out there just to tweak people. It's like, oh, you think you're triggered at 3.25% Fed funds rate? Fuck you. They're going to 6. 6? What are you kidding me? You're a lunatic. I'm like, okay, maybe. But I want people to think about it. Like, I do it on purpose. It's just performance art, you know, in a certain, I don't know what the number is going to be. It could be 4.5. It could be 5. I don't know what it is. It's probably going to be somewhere between 4.5 and 5%. If all they do is raise to 4.5, 5% and hold it there for 6 months or a year, is that a pivot? Are you kidding? Is that air you think you're breathing? No, it's not a pivot. 5% on the Fed funds rate, for fuck's sake. Get over yourself. Holy shit, dude. Come on. You were thinking everybody was screaming in January. They go to 1%, they'll crash the markets and they'll have to give it all back and go back to the zero bound. Well, we're at 3%, and nobody's died yet except Europe, Sri Lanka, the Bank of England, who had an operation run on them. But it's all Europe that's screeching. Lagarde is the one running out of room at the ECB. She's the one who can't hold on to credit spreads. She's the one who's watched her currency over the course of 15 months, drop from $1.22 to 96 cents. And the yields on her debt at the same time, mind you, go from negative 0.6% on the German Bund to 2.3% on the German Bund. 10-year?
Yeah, they're getting squeezed.
You don't think carry trades have been blown up? Interest rates, swaps have been blown up? Like, you don't think all this stuff is like everybody's hedge books have been blown up?
Well,
they're all screeching.
Yeah, when you factor leverage into the equation as well.
I haven't even talked leverage yet.
Right.
And who's stuffed to the gills with all this leverage free and sovereign debt? These sovereign debt instruments.
Yeah, I mean, that's
the people
part of the guilt problem, right?
Who are in worse shape, having been who have been stuffed into all of these leveraged debt instruments. The ones whose interest rates were even lower than ours.
They were negative.
Yeah. $12 trillion worth of negative yielding European sovereign debt at one point. Now imagine you're an Italian pension fund or you're a German pension fund searching for 8% yield, and the balance of your, like the marginal balance of your portfolio, like the stuff that matters, where you're getting most of that yield from, is a bunch of LDIs you bought from Blackrock, that are now down 35%.
And then you factor in,
and the Fed wants to go up another 200 basis points on the Fed funds rate,
and you don't produce anything.
And you got no energy.
You have an energy crisis.
You've decided not to buy energy from Russia, while you blame the United States for your policy. This is the part that like drives me up a fucking wall. Everybody's like, "Oh, the United States is trying to destroy Europe." Yeah, no shit. Good. Why do you care? It's the EU SSR, for Christ's sake. Germany's the Fourth Reich. They're militarizing again. Is anybody happy about this? Shouldn't we be trying to destroy these people? They're all commies. Klaus von Commie Schnitzel has a bust of fucking Lenin on his desk, on the shelf behind his desk. His favorite economist is a French socialist by the name of Thomas Piketty, whose only distinguishing characteristic is that his economic theories are even less penetrable and less logical than Keynes's were.
Yeah, what was his book called? Thomas Piketty?
Capital in the 21st Century.
Yeah. Very long book. basically.
Bad book. Impenetrable. Nobody reads it. No, nobody read it except
It's
for
like
Klaus Schwab.
900 pages, right?
I'd say most likely Klaus read the CEO bullet point Cliff Notes version. Well, now let's go with that. Yes, we will go with that. That sounds good. I can't even do a bad German accent. You believe the bugs? Like, come on. Like, this is coming. But I mean, it's not even that Klaus is anything other than the friggin', PR Bond villain in this MI6 story. Like this, this bad MI6 screenplay. It's clearly all the old European money. It's the British crown and the old Dutch banks and Italian banks and German banks and Austrian banks and Spanish banks and French banks. That's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with old colonial powers who don't want to give up their neocolonialism and still think that they can use the dumb, aggressive Yanks to do their bidding. And I firmly believe that they're trying to get us into a world war while they destroy their middle class so that they can discredit us completely and make us the most hated people on the planet. And they're succeeding at that. Except that the Fed is going to break them first.
This is very interesting. Because this theory, outside of you, I have not heard anywhere.
Well, if you listen to the Hedge Eye interview with Danielle DiMartino Booth.
She's on it.
Yeah. I honestly think that, if you listen to her talk, the things she's not allowed to say are all the things that I'm saying. And I didn't believe that until I watched it. And then I watched it and I'm like, yes, I will grow a little tail to be your Padawan. Like, I'm good.
What does this mean for me sitting here, individuals watching this? Mm-hmm. It seems like there's this huge dick measuring contest between the people who run the world.
Sucks Satan's cock. Yeah.
And we're just beholden to this dick measuring contest.
Well, it's how I described it when I was on. The best way to describe it, I think the first time I did this, at least in a recent interview, I was trying to explain it to Tom Woods, to a bunch of libertarians. So I really dumbed it down to, just talk about incentives. Don't talk about, just talk about the people and their incentives and all of this stuff. I said, look, just think of it this way. Yes, giants are fighting. The gods are fighting. We are ants trying not to get stepped on. We don't know. They are fighting for their own purposes. We may or may not benefit from one winning versus the other. We will most likely, I'm going to be honest with you. We know what it's like to live under these people, these neocolonial powers centered around Europe and the Eurodollar and the Eurodollar system. We know what that looks like, right? Endless friggin' war, endless conflict, and a stepwise march towards global technocratic communism. While everyone was winning, they were all willing to go along with it, including the New York banks and all the rest of it, and the Saudi sheiks and everybody else. The ones who were not willing to go along with it, clearly, were the Russians, because the Russians were primary commodity producers who were being told, you will supply all the oil and the gas and the coal and the aluminum, along with the Middle East. Eastern Europeans that we've brought out of communism, you get to be our shoeshine boys, and you get to cook our meals, and you get to clean our toilets. Well, no, that's reserved for the Africans that they brought into Europe. Because, please. We have a plan for the future that involves us putting up massive toll booths on the next iteration of the world's economy, which will not be based on oil, because we've decided that since we don't produce any oil, you're not allowed to produce any oil. Europe doesn't produce any oil and gas anymore, in any appreciable amounts where they can feed themselves. Not unless the population of Europe wants to go back to 50 million people, do they produce enough oil and gas and coal to feed themselves.
They could if they wanted to.
So, what's that? Well, not really. The Brits have got a lot.
There's some off the coast of
But the
Cyprus as
Norwegians are
well.
mostly tapped out. I mean, if the Norwegians had more oil, Statoil wouldn't be investing in African, oil, oil things off the coast of Cameroon and shit. I mean, they wouldn't be doing that. Statoil, the Norwegian state, petroleum company, the Norwegian equivalent of Rosneft, would be investing in domestic exploration and production, but they're not. And it was a big deal, 7 or 8 years ago, even 10 years ago, when Statoil started making investments overseas. Everybody's like, why is Statoil doing that? Because they don't have any more friggin' oil. So even the vaunted Norwegians, and to the lesser extent the Finns and the Swedes, the Scandinavian oil producers aren't really producing, don't really have access. There's a lot of oil off the north coast of Scotland, which the EU has told Scotland not to develop. And they don't want to produce oil and gas. They want to move us to a nuclear hydrogen economy because they know that they have demonized uranium and nuclear to the point where no way will we be allowed to have any kind of privatization of and decentralization of the uranium, the nuclear power market. It will be tightly controlled, more tightly controlled than and more regulatorily captured than the oil industry currently is. If you think big oil is big and dangerous, forget it. Big uranium or big thorium, 100 times worse. And then big hydrogen as the fuel to put in our cars. We're not going to be running around with batteries in our cars. We're going to be running around with PEM fuel cells and tanks of hydrogen, which we're going to get from it. That's their plan, and it's not a bad plan. I don't have any problem with that plan. I have a problem with that plan being where we don't have control over the production of the electricity and the hydrogen, which we could do at our homes with
Modular
with
reactors.
10 kilowatt PEM fuel cell technology that's been around from Plug Power and all these other small companies, Fuel Cell Energy and others, for 15 years. These people have had this stuff. It's out there. And guess what they run on? Propane. You can split you can cleave a hydrogen off of propane in a PEM fuel cell and generate electricity and hydrogen that way. You can do it. They don't want to do that. Why don't they want to do that? You know the answer to that. So this is the big plan. And they were hoping to crash everybody else because if they can invalidate the United States and they can destroy the United States culturally, politically, economically, in every way, right? Regulatorily, legally, destroy the 50-state compact if necessary, all of this stuff. They can do that. Then where's capital not going to flee to when Europe starts to collapse? The United States. Capital stays in Europe. Prices don't collapse completely. They're able to muddle through. And all that had to happen was that the Russians would knuckle under. The Russians were actually helping to enable this for years by selling gas to Europe for so cheap. But the Europeans voluntarily gave up that arrangement. Why? Because Russia refuses to be conquered. They still want to be able to supply oil and gas on their terms.
Can't believe
these people don't believe in anybody else having control over their destiny. So Russia gets to produce all the cheap commodities. China gets to produce all the cheap plastic crap. The Africans get to clean the toilets. The Americans get to be their army, their enforcement arm. Eastern Europeans get to be the IT guys.
I'm trying to think through the conversation from the American perspective. Like at some point, Jamie Dimon, the commercial bankers with access to the Fed, like you said, like when everybody's benefiting, everybody goes along with it. But at what point did the Americans stop benefiting and fighting back? Like, what was it? Was it COVID particularly? Was it?
No, it was before that.
It was before
they
that.
saw it. They saw it all the time. So part of the thesis that I haven't presented today, or the argument I haven't presented today, is the difference between SOFR, the secured overnight funding rate, and LIBOR. Right. Now, LIBOR, the London Interbank Offer Rate, has been the debt benchmark for dollar-based lending since the 1890s.
Completely rigged market. It's been proven.
It's a completely rigged market, but most importantly, a completely London and Europe controlled market. Okay. So the argument that the Eurodollar system was actually setting monetary policy far more than the Fed was setting monetary policy was correct. Jeff Snyder, formerly of Lombard Partners, kept talking about this for years, where Jeff made the mistake is believing that the Eurodollar system, he said this, so I'm only quoting him now, but I'm going to throw his ass under the bus too, because I don't give a shit. I want to win. I don't want to eat bugs, so I don't give a shit whose toes I step on.
I'm not eating bugs either.
No, I'm just not eating bugs. I like steak too much. Fuck them. So, and Jeff said this. He said, when the Fed started raising interest rates and he really started getting antsy about what was happening and banging his shoe on the table about how terrible all this was, he said, you don't understand. The Eurodollar system is the free market reaction against the Federal Reserve, against the central banking system. That's bullshit. That is tell number one that Jeff Snyder is either owned and operated, or just as an operative, or is just too friggin' stupid for all of his smarts to understand that this is not a free market system. This is a system controlled and created by oligarchs for oligarchs to control the central banks and control national policy and undermine national sovereignty. More so than the central banks actually are. Because if you have a transnational shadow banking system that doesn't respect borders, controlling all the individual countries' central banks, then how is that free market?
Free market reaction.
Yeah. Off of the central banks creating the liquidity?
Yeah, it doesn't seem very free. And we have evidence of this supranational, the Bank of International Settlements. Yeah.
Right.
Have you ever seen all the plenaries men that dives into the HSBC fines and how the BIS basically stepped in and said, hey, U.S. Treasury, we're not going to respect your laws. We're just going to hit these guys with a slap on the wrist. Mark Carney had to step in.
Right.
All this shit.
Right. So back to SOFR versus LIBOR. I said, as of January 1st, 2021, all U.S. debt will now be indexed to SOFR. LIBOR will be phased out, and LIBOR as an instrument will lose all of its, U.S. dollar LIBOR will lose all of its liquidity by middle of next year. Oh, by the way. And why SOFR is important is because when the Fed, in the past, whenever the Fed raised interest rates and everybody else all the debt in the world was indexed to LIBOR, if London banks caught a cold because the Fed was raising interest rates, LIBOR would blow out to the upside, which would then translate across the Atlantic to American banks who may or may not have had any trouble with loan servicing. Because what if the British economy was in the shitter? Fed raises interest rate, but the American economy was in good shape. Right? Well, you raise interest rates, the Fed raises interest rates by 2%. LIBOR blows out blows out 100 basis points above that. And what's happening over here is then our banks have to respond to that because of LIBOR. All of our banks have to, and all the debt that was written as a premium or discount to LIBOR also have to adjust. Your credit cards, your HELOCs, your adjustable rate mortgages, right? Your credit revolvers if you're a corporate, right? They all right, move up and down every quarter, right? So even if the issuer of the credit revolver doesn't need the money, but goes up, it's LIBOR, this is the contract, it's just math, it's just code at that point. Code gets executed. So now that same debt in the United States is indexed to SOFR. SOFR is tied to the Fed funds rate. SOFR is independent of whatever happens with LIBOR. Now, I'm not saying that that has actually borne itself out yet, right? Because if you watch the way SOFR versus 1 month LIBOR has traded, what LIBOR has been doing is anticipating the next Fed funds rate hike. And then it rises as a premium over SOFR to approximately what it expects the Fed funds rate to be, the new one to be, and then the spread collapses. So it goes up and then down and up and down and up and down, right? But at some point, it's going to rise above that because the actual money markets are under stress because there's no other sources of dollar liquidity.
Natural interest rates.
And what you'll see is as opposed to on the day of the Fed funds Fed FOMC meeting, as opposed to LIBOR trading at 85 basis points over SOFR, anticipating 75 basis points by the Fed, you'll see a point. You'll see 100 basis points or 125 basis points, 150 basis points. And when that happens, that's when then the gnashing and wailing of teeth overseas is going to be insane. What you see between Fed meetings is always LIBOR trying to hold back that anticipation for as long as possible. Holding that spread to like 6, 8, 10 basis points, and all of a sudden it's got to start jumping 4, 5, 6 basis points a day and it goes, right? As opposed to being a nice straight line up.
Yeah.
Right. So the point being is that Europe's banks can now get in trouble. And since the Fed has all this liquidity in the reverse repo facility, standing repo facilities, all this shit, they've got all the tools they need to keep the markets as liquefied as the banks need to be. They have different tools than they had in 2008 that are designed for today's environment, which is fundamentally different than it was back then.
Yeah, Basel III, banks are better capitalized. It's not a housing crisis.
And Basel III changed the rules on gold to advantage the ECB because they need part of what keeps the confidence in the Fed high is a low price in the price of gold. Basel III was designed to change the way gold trades and is held on the balance sheet so that unallocated paper gold or unallocated futures gold futures contracts can't be held at par as bank reserves anymore. Meaning physical gold is an only allocated physical gold can be used as a source of net as FSR, funding stabilization ratio.
So it's favored.
NSFR, the net funding stabilization ratio, which is basically, the capital adequacy ratio under Basel III for Basel III compliant banks. Meaning that
there's more demand for physical
gold is Europe wants a higher physical gold price. Why? Because all the $4.88 trillion worth of European sovereign debt and corporate debt and swap and central bank swaps that's on their balance sheet are all falling in value as interest rates rise. As rates rise, the price of those bonds fall. So the ECB's balance sheet is actually falling. What they want is to have a higher gold price to offset the loss. The Fed, of course, doesn't want a higher gold price because then that calls into question their ability to be a good steward of the dollar. So by the Fed raising interest rates, they create a massive demand for dollars, which continues the rating of the paper markets in gold for dollars using the gold futures market in the United States, which is mostly cash settled, and in London, mostly cash settled, right? As a piggy bank to get dollars in an emergency because it's the easiest way to get dollars. Sell gold, buy dollars. Easier than selling anything else. Almost the easiest trade in the world. It's even easier than certain treasury maturities. So Basel III is designed to help the ECB get through the current crisis. And the Fed is raising interest rates aggressively to drain the Eurodollar markets, destroy bank gearing and access to credit in dollar access to credit and dollar gearing overseas, drain the shadow banking system, and force, while at the same time having the tools necessary to insulate the American banking system from Europe's collapse, which the Fed is engineering. And what's the source of power of all of these fucking old inbred assholes all across Europe? The Eurodollar system.
Mm-hmm.
Where is Charles's real power as King of England? It's in the British Crown's wealth portfolio.
It's fascinating because you have rumors swirling last week, I believe, that liquidity for gold physical was drying up between LME and COMEX.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously at the Fed. So it just seems like you're seeing these blows in real time. Most people unaware of the game that you're describing here.
Oh yeah, and the COMEX and the LBMA are getting drained.
Yeah.
And we're going to go to a physical market soon. There's no doubt. Right? And the Russians are setting up a physical gold exchange. The Chinese already have one. Singapore's got one. Dubai has got one. I mean, the Fed's game about, holding the price of gold down is going to end. Certainly. I mean, I don't have any doubt about that. But, the reason why the ECB wants a rise in gold price is because they mark the gold on their balance sheet to market. Whatever the market price for gold is, that's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So the ECB is getting squeezed at every moment here. They're getting squeezed on their sovereign debt by the Fed. They're getting squeezed on their gold, right?
They're squeezed in the FX markets.
Squeezed in the FX market. Squeezed in the energy markets.
They're getting squeezed pretty hard.
It's almost like Putin and Powell are coordinating policy here. My wife's coming through in the background.
It's okay. So how does this play out? How quickly does it play out? How slowly does it play out?
I don't know. Again, I'm not going to, I would love to give a name or, name a date or whatever, but let's look ahead to something you talked about earlier. The United States is staring at the beginnings of a big rollover period starting next summer.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of U.S. debt has to be rolled over next summer. The Treasury's going to have to do so at much higher rates. The effect on the budget now has been bad. It's going to get incrementally worse, if not a lot worse, when a lot of that debt has to be rolled over. That's why Janet Yellen is talking about now buying back some debt, right?
Yeah, weren't they asking the banks like, "Hey,
right?
Do you want to buy?" Yeah, she asked the banks last week, like, "Would you want us to buy some of these treasuries from you?"
Sure. Right. But they're still, and U.S. gross tax receipts this year hit a massive record, like $4.8 trillion.
That should.
And yet they want to raise taxes again. Like, I have no, there's many ways to get out of this, Marty.
Well, this year is going to be interesting because you don't have the capital gains taxes, which make up a material portion. Then you have people being exacerbated by inflation. You have to imagine.
Oh yeah, the tax receipts are going to roll over badly next year. They're going to be terrible next year. But right now they're actually flush with cash. They can actually if the people in DC actually wanted to be pro-American in their policy, and I'm talking specifically about Democrats and rhinos, then they would be proposing spending cuts, regulatory cuts, and tax cuts. But they're not. They're talking about everything else. They're talking about the exact opposite of that.
Yeah. The Inflation Reduction Act came with some interesting Trojan horse spending.
Yeah, are you kidding me? So these people are vandals. They work for a foreign power, and that foreign power is not China. Fed policy is Fed's hawkish policy is doing, is having bad effects on China. But at the same time, ready? The Chinese are gearing up because they know that the United States no longer wants to be the holder of the global reserve currency. At least the Federal Reserve doesn't. Powell talked about this. He doesn't want to manage the global reserve currency anymore. He knows it's a bad idea. He's always known it's a bad idea. He's always known it's been bad for the United States. He's even said at a Humphrey Hawkins testimony last year or earlier this year, there's room in the world for more than one reserve currency. Okay, China's gearing up to becoming a regional reserve currency for Asia. By the way, so is the ruble to a lesser extent. What does China have to do in order to pull that off? They've got to massively print yuan.
Yeah. They got to do
while everybody else is tightening. While everybody else is tightening, the PBOC has the opportunity now, especially with Xi just being elected leader for life, which translates in market speak to political stability.
That would make sense because if they want a reserve currency, they got to flood the rest of the market.
They're going to have to flood the world
yuan.
with and then sell them yuan-based, Chinese yuan debt. Yada,
and they've
yada,
set up the infrastructure Belt and Road Initiative where that makes it very easy just to get into Africa.
Recycle trade surpluses and all the rest of it. Yes. So it's here. It's all coming. How does the United States get out of this? Well, they collapse Europe and destroy it. And Europe, I hate to say it, Europe deserves it. I know none of you voted for it, but none of you also were able to get over your own internal divisions to actually vote in people who wouldn't betray you by leaving confused electorates and election results that allow Davos to construct weak coalition governments that do their bidding and freeze out any populist parties or neuter them, as the case may be. Like, I hate to tell you this to you, but you got no one to blame but yourselves. Even though, yeah, and your leadership is just as traitorous as ours. Same thing in the UK, everywhere else. I feel for everybody, but at the same time, as a game player, as the board analyzer, like, this is the world. And you guys had the opportunities to get over your own sense of Europeanness and say, I'm not going to vote for those guys. Germans, you had the opportunity to vote for AfD, give them 30% of the vote, and shut the Greens down. And you didn't. You voted for Greens. You voted for the SPD, the Greens, and the Free Democrats.
And the Greens are gifting you with an energy crisis. And not only that, they're gloating in the middle of the energy crisis too. This is good.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing. I can look at Spain. I can look at Sweden finally got their heads out of their ass. The Italians got their heads out of their ass. But, you've got deep state. I mean, if you think the swamp is deep in D.C., like, come on, dude, we're pikers compared to Rome.
Well, if they can do it.
But they can get a government elected in, but they may not get past the mafiosi in
overarching
Rome,
mafia
in Rome. That's the problem, and that gets really freaking murky. I could do another hour on just that alone. So, when I look at this, I have both sympathy and no sympathy. Like, I don't have any sympathy for anybody who votes Republican straight down the line if your option is Mitt Romney and some other rhino for senator in Utah. No, you vote for the libertarian if he's on the ballot. You write in no one otherwise. You do something. Or better yet, you storm the Bastille and you tell Mr. Romney, that's it. But I understand at a certain level we all feel kind of powerless about this. And I understand that politics got us into this mess and it's not going to get us out. And I've got all my bromides for this shit. I get it. But part of me also just looks at it and goes very dispassionately at this point and goes, yeah, it's a big shit sandwich. We all have to take a bite. Now, what are you going to do about it? Like, the French know how to throw a party. But,
I mean, that was actually,
nobody else does.
Do you follow Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Project?
A little bit. I know the name. I haven't followed him closely, but I like the 10th Amendment Project.
Yeah, and I watched one of his YouTube videos over the weekend. The 4 principles needed to stoke revolution. That's like, again, going back to the bromites about you're not going to fix the political system via the political system via voting. You really need to engender a movement of ideas around like, hey, like this republic was started and the government wasn't supposed to have anywhere near the power that it has today. You live under the largest government that's ever existed in the history of humanity. That would cause the founding fathers to shriek. And again, going back to like, you can't vote your way out of this. I've been convinced of that, but the only way out is to engender this idea revolution where people wake up and say, hey, I have a 10th Amendment. The states have their own rights. They're like, I literally just need a tipping point of individuals in the United States specifically to stand up and say, no, you're not gonna
back
search.
Politicians at the state level that are winning. And I look to my own home state, the great state of Florida. Florida, man, is awesome. We have Ron DeSantis. And Ron DeSantis is reminding everybody that state governments are powerful. And they're more powerful than the federal government if they just say, well, if the federal government's going to fuck us, then we don't want their help. And we'll rebuild. I mean, what he pulled off in Fort Myers area after Hurricane Ian already, like getting the Sanibel Causeway rebuilt in 3 days. Like, dude, are you kidding me? Well, it's like Putin rebuilding the Kerch Strait Bridge in 4 days, right? Road traffic across the Kerch Strait Bridge was resumed within a week. Okay? This is what happens when you don't have a whole bunch of people actively trying to stop things from happening for political reasons, to feather their own political nest. When you break through the mafiosi and you break through the union bosses and all the rest of them because they didn't get their envelopes of fucking cash. When the Florida governor walks in with the friggin' National Guard and just starts getting shit done. Yeah. And you're like, oh.
This actually ain't that bad.
I guess I don't get my envelope of cash to go lay concrete. Yeah, you don't, fuckhead. Now get out of here before I put your ass in jail. Like,
people
this
with
is,
that.
this is the beginning, and this is why they're deathly afraid of Ron DeSantis.
Yeah, well, with the world going to shit with the energy crisis, with the economic crisis, I mean, the opportunity has never been better for people to recognize the power that Ron DeSantis has within his state. Like, I don't even think he should run for president. I think he should just stay in Florida and really.
We don't want him to run for president, even though I think that him and Tulsi Gabbard are the perfect unity ticket. But I said this earlier in the year. I said this at the beginning of the year. I said the perfect unity ticket is Tulsi Gabbard running as the VP for Ron DeSantis, and she handles the foreign policy. He handles the domestic policy. They run a Reagan Volcker. And again, I said this a year ago, like 10 days after Powell raised interest rates by the reverse repo rate by 5%, 5 basis points. I said, oh, I can see how this plays out.
Yeah.
It's setting up a Reagan Volcker style revolution, and it's now playing out now. And I'm not the only one saying it anymore. And now, either because they've listened to me and now are parroting me, or they've come to those same conclusions independently. Great. I don't give a shit. Doesn't matter. I don't want the credit. I don't need the credit. My ego is good enough. Like it gets fed every goddamn day. I don't need it. What I need is for people to realize that this is the fight that we're in. And like you said, I agree with you. A revolution of ideas, that is, and a revolution in the way we think about the way the world operates. And we use that as the means by which to really fundamentally change the way we approach all of this stuff, so that we're not sucked in by the stupid little, if not A, then B, false dyad psyops that they lay in front of us, which you and I opened the show with. And that's the important thing to understand. The Straussian two-step that they run on us every day, and they run multiple layers on us every day. You just have to say, no, that's bullshit. That's nonsense. I'm not buying that. And I'll be honest with you, as I said earlier, I really do think that for the most part, American people get it. And I think a lot of European people get it too. And I mean, I'm consistently amazed at the whitewashing of the media whitewashing of the extent to which European people are taking to the streets and revolting, and you never see anything. Like, it's amazing. Like, the yellow vest protests never ended in France.
No, never. I was over there. I saw it firsthand. Yeah. That's the thing, like with the whitewashing and like the glossing over them, really not highlighting it does seem that there is a material amount of people beginning to wake up and recognize the game that's being played and try to get this idea revolution going. Like it seems like we're at, I don't know if we're at a critical tipping point, but we're definitely at a point where it's like, okay, people recognize this now. Just how do we, I don't want to say organize because organize brings bad connotations with it, but like how do we begin increasing the momentum?
Marty, all we have to do is keep putting our own individual pressure and burble it up through the zeitgeist. Like that's the real power, because that's decentralized. That's something they can't stop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And eventually it burbles up to people like Elon Musk. It eventually burbles up to other people who are in positions to change change the conversation completely.
Yeah, we're seeing this, I mean, at state treasuries like Louisiana, South Carolina, divesting from Blackrock. It's a great signal right there.
It's a beautiful signal.
Yeah.
Especially since I think BlackRock's the next Lehman. But again, I'm running out of time, unfortunately. My wife and I made weirdly enough, I'm talking about all this stuff, but I made an appointment to go look at a goat this afternoon. I might have to run in a couple of minutes and go look at a buck, because I need a new breeding buck. So,
well, let's end it with just like a little teaser on the BlackRock theory.
Sure. I'm going to leave some people with a little bit of thought. Everybody's worried about BlackRock and their nearly $8 trillion worth of assets under management. That's nice, but what does that mean? This is a company that makes between $95 and $100 billion a quarter in asset management fees. Right? That's it. I want you don't have to be an MBA to read BlackRock's balance sheet and think about what it's gotten itself involved in and invested in over the last couple of years since it got access to the Fed funds window, since it got access to all this stuff. Now look at its shareholder equity. All of BlackRock's money is built on $38 billion worth of shareholder equity. I'm sorry, dude, but that is not a lot of money in an interest rate rising environment when you are heavily exposed to real estate.
Yeah.
On the balance sheet.
Corporate debt. Yeah, it's not looking good. All right, that's a good note to end it on. BlackRock could.
Especially since JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, what did they do to Lehman Brothers?
See ya.
They took Lehman Brothers down and took all their business.
Yeah.
They took their book of clients. Huh. Interesting.
All right.
That's the way I look at it. I'm like, if I'm Diamond, I'm like, huh. I know how to fuck Larry Fink.
Yeah.
Hey, Fink, suck Satan's cock.
Larry's backed himself into a corner. Like the ESG narrative's failing so hard. It's beautiful to see.
He backed up the truck on Davos winning in 2020, getting rid of Trump and everything else. And now he's trying to figure out a way to get himself out of it.
He had a few
I'm telling you, family offices are looking for new places to invest money. 401k contributions are going to start dropping. Pension systems are going belly up. He's going to be asking for a bailout. Everybody's expecting that he's going to go to the Fed and ask the Fed for a bailout, and he thinks he's going to get it. And I'm telling you, I don't think he's going to get it. I think what's going to happen is they're going to carve him up, and they're going to take him out. I want you to go look at BlackRock's stock chart. I did this for my patrons the other day. I looked at the Q3 close, so the end of September, the last week of September. That was a breakdown on the stock, technically, below long-term support on that week. But it also translated to the monthly and quarterly chart. And then BlackRock is right now tracing a bankruptcy chart, or at least a move back down into the 300s.
Then he's had that Citi analyst come out and downgrade their stock, basically purely on I don't even think looking at technicals, looking at the ESG narrative and saying this narrative's failing. It's backfiring. Yep. Sell the stock.
Because
they want that book.
When it comes right down to it, people who control real money don't like losing 35% because of virtue signaling.
No. That's one of my good calls from earlier this year. Who knows if it was individuals like yourself, myself, others bubbling up signal that ESG is bad and creating this market sentiment in the zeitgeist. But I said on stage,
I saw it last year firsthand at the Bitcoin 2021 when they were discussing ESG and ESG compliant Bitcoin, green Bitcoin, and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I just looked at it. And the mood in the room was like, yeah, fuck you. It was not good. It was so not good. I'm like, yeah. I love these people. All the glitz and the glamour and the Vegas of Miami at Bitcoin 2021, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm still seeing that whole phone freaker friggin' mentality, and I'm just like, oh yeah, this culture hasn't fucking changed.
We're gonna destroy ESG. We're gonna beat Davos. We'll eventually beat the Fed as well. We will be free.
And then it's like, look, let the Fed do our job for us in the short term, and then we'll turn on them.
Yes.
I have my goals. So
we've got a battle of ideas upon us, freaks. Let's get all these good ones bubbled up, because I have a 2.5-year-old and a 4-month-old, and they will not be living in a world where they are debt slaves and digital slaves. So
2.5, that's a great age.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Once they hit 3, they become the most interesting little people. So good for you, man. I'm so happy for you. I didn't know. That's great. I only had one, and it's, my big regret, didn't have kids earlier. So
thank you for that. Go get a goat.
All right, gotta go. But you be well. So everybody, you can do the thing.
We'll link to on Twitter. We'll link to everything.
You can find me on Twitter. You can find me. My blog is tomluongo.me. You guys know where I am.
Your Twitter handle doesn't do you any favors. It's very hard to remember.
TFL 1728. It's my old handle from ages ago.
It's your aim.
Because I refused to change it. So I love my Twitter handle, because everybody needs a good George Lucas reference in the morning.
Yes, but when I'm going to try to search you, I'm like, what is it? TFL TNL. And then I can never remember.
It's my initials. I know it doesn't do me any, and that's actually good. I like it. That's
good. All right.
All right, Marty, you take care.
You too. See you, dude.
Be well.